Douglas, do you have any sense of what it means in this passage and more broadly that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom and an appropriate, let's say, precondition for freedom? Why do you think it's conceptualized as fear?
I love this part where here's my thesis on the passage, and I would like you to explain to everybody why I am right. And, you know, this guy's sitting here thinking, okay, yeah, okay, I think I can work with this, right? They've already established, I guess, sort of a pseudo theme amongst themselves on what the text is talking about. But it's very funny because it wasn't just, you know, what do you think about this, Douglas? It was like, Douglas, tell me exactly why I'm right about this. Let's hear it. I'm sure he didn't mean it like that, but that's what it said. It kind of comes off like that. It's kind of funny, I think.
Well, I think there's a proper fear that in this case I think is linked to transcendence. So there's the fear of the tyrant, which is normal and natural, and which we are all subject to. But there should be a greater fear, i.e. the fear of the transcendent
Violating
principle,
it.
Violating that,
Right,
yes.
right.
And of course, this is why the postmodern attack on traditional Western culture is so dangerous.
Started addressing Jordan Peterson's question with fear. He was talking about fear. And so this professor very smoothly switched it from a discussion about fear to transcendence and about the problems of moral relativity, postmodern views of that. And now we've moved into transcendence. The problem is these ideas are getting off track from what the text itself is trying to say. Remember, Israel came into Egypt. God told them this was going to happen. And so they came into Egypt, but God also told Abraham, he said, they're going to go down and they're going to serve this people. And they're going to come out and they'll come to the Holy Land. This is not a story about overcoming tyrants, because there are tyrants still today that exist. I think what the text is trying to say is that up until now, God has made promises, but so far he has not fulfilled any of those promises. Now, God is going to fulfill his promises. And I think ultimately this is the theme of the Tanakh and the story here in the Torah, specifically with the Exodus, is about God is reliable. We can believe in God. You can have amunah.
So makes the tyrant the final arbiter in some real sense, right?
It becomes justification.
You know, people have asked me, and I'm always embarrassed by this, but people have commented on my courage for speaking up, so to speak. And I think you don't actually understand the situation. I'm not courageous in my speaking up. I'm more afraid of the alternative. And part of the reason for that was that when I was a clinician and I spent thousands, tens of thousands of hours dealing with people's serious problems.
So the things that he's saying is true, but you don't need the Bible to tell you that these things are true. These things are all discoverable through experience, which is what he talks about being a clinical psychologist. And these themes of tyranny and power and how we interact with them, these are all things that we can talk about outside of the Bible. And so what we really need to focus on is not how we see echoes of our own focus of study and our own experiences in the Torah. The first thing we need to do is find out what is the Torah saying. Ultimately, you know, human beings have an infinite number of experiences, right? In one sense, I mean, not literally infinite, but you know, lots and lots of different types of experience. And obviously, the Torah is not trying to cover all those. The Torah is a teaching tool. Torah means teaching. It shares the same root as Mora, which means teacher, and Hora, which is a parent. Right? What do Mora, Hora, and Torah all have in common? They're about teaching. They're about guiding. And God is trying to guide us. And what is he trying to guide us about? The reason why you find the reference to the Exodus from Egypt throughout Jewish literature, our prayer book is filled with it. The holidays talk about it. Shabbat, we talk about it. Why do we spend so much time talking about the Exodus from Egypt? Because the Exodus from Egypt was an overwhelming demonstration and proof that God keeps his word. And that in those situations where God has made a promise, but has not yet fulfilled it, we can rely on our past experiences with God, seeing God does fulfill his promises, and know that those promises that have not been fulfilled will be fulfilled one day. And that includes the Messianic era. 2,000 years, Jews wandered from place to place, being kicked out by the nations, wherever they would live. And God promised that's exactly what was going to happen. But he also promised that he would bring the Jewish people back to the land and eventually would set a king over us again. And we would no longer talk about the Exodus from Egypt. Why? Why aren't we going to always talk about the Exodus from Egypt? Because now the promises that we've been waiting for centuries and thousands of years, those have also been fulfilled. God has kept his word. Those promises he kept were thousands of years ago, right? Or you say that the promise of the difficulty of the exile is an ongoing promise he's been keeping. But now we see that God has brought the Jewish people back to the land. He's fulfilling that promise and bringing Jews from all over the world. The modern state of Israel is a miracle. We see over and over again this demonstration that God keeps his word. And that's what it means when it says, back to Moshe, God says that they do not know my name. And it's Hashem. What does that mean? They don't know your name, Hashem. It gets used all the time in the Hebrew Bible prior to Moses, right? You see all the time in Genesis. People will name altars using God's four-letter holy name. So what it means is that up to this time I've made promises, but I have not fulfilled my promises. They haven't known that aspect of me now. Now I'm going to start fulfilling my promises, and I'm going to bring you to the Holy Land, inherit the land that I promised to your forefathers.
The part of the manner in which God is portrayed throughout the biblical corpus, but I would say in traditions around the world, as that phenomenon that alerts you to your own misbehavior. And it is really something, again, I really learned from Jung, contra Freud in some real sense, is that, and contra Nietzsche, who believed that maybe we could create our own values, is that there's something within that is transcendent, because it isn't only in you, it's in everyone in some fundamental and real sense, plus it's eternal in some fundamental and real sense, and it calls you on your misbehavior.
But don't you think
Once again, I want to point out that those are interesting discussions and interesting points, and those are great to have as you're trying to examine the world and figure out what's going on. But isn't this supposed to be an Exodus story? What does this have to do with the Exodus story?
culture is approaching a kind of crisis point? In other words, the postmodernists, everything's constructive, truth is not there, etc., etc. There's no reality except what you make it. Mm-hmm. But of course, truth is always about something, as C.S. Lewis used to say, and what it's about is reality.
Yeah, well, there's this insistence.
And people are going to hit the wall at point after point today
on the postmodern
because there
front,
is reality.
It's as if we're insisting that there is nothing other than Towers of Babel. Mm-hmm. There isn't anything they're being built against or shielding us from. It's just one Tower of Babel after another. And it can be, and I can't help but see a real tyrannical demand for power in that. Well, you want to remake people in the image of your ideology. And so you have to insist that they have no intrinsic nature, because otherwise the pesky realities of the transcendent nature get in the way of your Luciferian presumptions.
Well, there's no God, no truth. There is only power.
Right.
The question is what does this have to do with Exodus?